Russia and Ukraine are still locked in a very deadly and expanding conflict. In the United States, we hold uh, ourselves hostage, so to speak, to reporting that comes from the front lines, from the battlefield, by correspondents, by combat reporters, and we hold them in the high esteem. I mean, these are people that we have lionized over the years. Dating back to World War II, when reporters like Ernie Pyle would accompany American forces to the front line, to put their lives on the line to give us this information that we desperately needed about conflict, to bring perspective. And sometimes, like Ernie Pyle, they lost their lives because they got too close. They paid a price. But in America, we lionize these journalists. We give them awards. We give them Pulitzer prizes. They write best-selling novels. And the last thing we call them are propagandists. We believe them to be truth tellers because they put everything on the line to be there, to see that which we can't see, and then explain it to us. Today, we're going to be joined by the Russian equivalent of Ernie Pyle, Alexander Kolb, reporter. He is somebody that in the West, if you know of him, you denigrate him as a propagandist. That's how he's been sold by the American government, by European governments, by the press. But he's anything but. This is a man who, in the best tradition of combat journalism, has been there on the front lines, not just in Ukraine, but just give me a second to explain this so people watching understand. First of all, he served for 2 years as a Russian paratrooper. So as a war correspondent, he understands the military. In 2004, he was in Grozny when Akhmat Kadyrov was assassinated, and he was injured. That's how close he was to this story. Later in 2004, in the horrific events of Beslan, he not only reported on this tragedy, but he and a fellow journalist participated in the rescue of the children who were victims of this horror. He was in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, in 2008 during the fighting there, where he was wounded, and he received an award from the Russian government for courage in his reporting there. This is an award that is given to combat soldiers for courage under fire. This was given to a journalist for his courage in covering this conflict. He reported from Syria, where he was credited with participation in this military operation. He was taken hostage in Libya. That's how close he came to reporting that. He was taken hostage and held hostage. He has been on the front lines around the world reporting the stories, including Ukraine. This is a man who has been there. He has seen firsthand what's going on. And yet we call him propagandist. I'd like to introduce him as probably the bravest war correspondent I've ever had the honor and privilege to meet. Alexander, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you about the conflict in Ukraine and your perspectives.
Да, здравствуйте, Scott.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Scott. Thank you very much for your high esteem. It's my pleasure to participate in your show again. Let's have a talk, not to beat about the bush.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the biggest story of the day. Crimea Bridge. Is this a sign of weakness on the part of Russia? I mean, the bridge was attacked once. It's a red line, but Ukraine has attacked it again. Russia last night carried out retaliatory attacks, but is that sufficient? Is this a turning point in the conflict? Is Ukraine regaining the initiative? Is this a sign of Russian weakness? Can Russia protect Crimea? What's going on with Crimea? Let's not beat around the bush.
большое поражение в большой войне, невозможно вести боевые действия и все время преуспевать в них, все время побеждать, потому что противник серьезный, противнику помогает
Adversary is
иметь современные
formidable, and the collective West
найти
back them,
современные
and
технологии,
they
и
have at
европейская
hand
помощь,
all the
которая
state-of-the-art
предоставляет Североатлантический
reconnaissance
альянс и
equipment and the
сориентирован в
reconnaissance
режиме
data from
реального
NATO
времени
and
весьма
real-time
детальные списывают сбросы,
adjustment from low-orbit
поэтому, ну,
satellite
наверное,
constellation of
полностью
NATO.
закрыть нельзя этот
Definitely, you
вопрос
cannot
сейчас. Конечно,
preclude
это с
everything.
точки зрения информационного
Definitely,
ответный удар хороший,
well,
потому что вторая
information-wise,
больше
it is
всего
a painful
восточной
blow
логистической
to
артерии,
Russia. It's the second time
которая
a
течет
major
через
logistics
Крымский
main
полуостров,
road
но
is
это в том
attacked
числе и
that
символ
connects the mainland Russia
возвращения
with
Мариуполя
Crimea.
в
Well, it's
лоно
not only
Российской
that, it's only a
Федерации
symbol
и
of the reunification of
возвращения
Crimea, and that bridge
большую
that
Россию с
links
маленьким
mainland Russia
полуостровом,
with this
он
small
всегда был
peninsula
символичным
has
и для
always
всей
been a
России в
token thing
целом,
for the
и
whole of
для
the
нашего
country
президента в
and for our
частности.
president
Поэтому,
in particular.
конечно, с точки
And
зрения
from the perspective
информационной войны,
of
Украина
info
выйдет
campaign
из
and warfare,
этого успеха для своих
Ukraine
спецслужб самым
will pump it as
максимумом.
a success with the help of their special services.
Для них мост это
Well,
не
at the
символ,
same
для
time,
них
for them,
это
it is not a
важное
symbol, probably,
логистическое
but
звено,
an important
логистический пункт, который
logistical
снабжает
artery
нашу южную
that helps
группировку
us
на
supply to
территории
our
Каховской
southern group
области и часть
of troops
Запорожской
in the
области.
Kherson and
Через
Zaporozhye
Крым проходят и
regions,
эшелоны с техникой туда,
because
и
the
боеприпасы
convoys with
доставляют,
military
и
equipment and munitions
частей
go through
поставок вооружения
Crimea,
также проходит
as well
через
as
Крым.
the
Поэтому на
replenishment of
протяжении
troops.
всех этих месяцев
So,
Украина
in the course of all
пытается
these
это
months,
снабжение
Ukraine has
перебросить
been
отсюда. И
trying to
первое
cut that off,
нападение
hence the first
на
attack,
мост, когда была взорвана грузовая
when
машина с огромным количеством
a
взрывчатки во
truck
время
full
выдачи
of
один парашют,
explosive
да,
was blown up and
моста,
a
но в
span
одну сторону моста
sank, and one of
проделала. Тем
the
не менее,
sides of
мост
the bridge
продолжал
was not operable, but still it
функционировать.
kept
Оттуда
functioning with the
фактически
help of the
ударили по
other
этому мосту
side.
ракетами,
And they
особенно с
also
появлением в
tried to impact it
распоряжении
with
Украины Storm
missiles,
Shadow. Буквально неделю
especially after they
назад
have
над
received the
Керчью
Storm
были
Shadow 1 week ago.
сбиты несколько
They
ракет,
brought
которые
down
также
several missiles over
вероятно
Kerch,
были
and
нацелены
probably
на
those
Крымский
were
мост. Но
aiming
вот,
the
к
Crimea
сожалению,
Bridge
водная часть удалась.
from the
Наверное, надо
side
делать
of
выводы,
Ukraine.
надо,
But
наверное,
anyway,
вспоминать
this water,
технологические
this
способы, с
seaborne
помощью
attack was successful,
которых
has been
боролись перед
successful.
подлодками.
This
Можно
is why
привести в
probably
пример
we should look at other means that are
Великую
effective to
Отечественную
combat
войну, когда
submarines. Let's
наш
look back at the
подводный
history
флот
of the
был
Second World
фактически
War when our
заперт в
underwater
Финском заливе,
fleet
когда
was
немцы
locked, our
просто
navy was
оборудовали
locked in
перекрыли все
the
пути выхода на
Gulf of
Балтику
Finland, and the Germans
стальными
cut it off
сетями. И преодолеть
with
их наш
steel
подводный
nets,
флот так и не
and
смог. Я
our
думаю, что
submarine
с
fleet
учетом
was
того,
not
насколько
capable
далеко
of
сейчас
overcoming that. So
шагнули
now,
технологии
given the advance in
обезопасить
technologies
себя
and
с помощью
solutions,
каких-то механических
making it safer
препятствий,
with the
в
help of
принципе,
some
можно. Но
mechanical
вот, к сожалению,
obstacles or physical
у нас, у
obstacles is a
русских есть такая
possibility. Unfortunately, the
поговорка:
Russians have a
пока
saying,
петух,
you
пока кров
know,
не
you
крякнет,
wait for the
мужик
first
не
thunderbolt,
перекрестится, да. Вот кров
and you
крякнул, сейчас,
won't
наверное,
cross
будем думать,
yourself until that
как же
point
нам
of time. So
обезопасить
now
себя
we
от
have
этих
seen that
подводных
and heard that
дронов.
thunderbolt,
При
and we
этом,
should
ну,
cross ourselves
катастрофы в
and
военном плане
save
не
ourselves from the
произошло. Мы знаем, что уже
underwater
запущено реверсное
drones, but
движение
it
по этому
hasn't been
мосту.
a
Да, это,
military
конечно,
disaster
неудобство.
because the
Временное
reverted
это неудобство
flow is used
полностью,
now to go
как
both
заявляют
ways.
власти, на
Definitely,
18
definitely it's a
моста
hindrance,
уйдет
and the
несколько
authorities have
месяцев до
claimed that
ноября, просто
several
это
months
дело
will be required to
ремонтировать. Но у
fully
нас остаются
repair the
железнодорожные
bridge,
пути.
but
Главное,
still
у
we
нас
have the
остается
railway
сухопутный коридор
operating and
через
the land corridor
Донецкую Народную
functioning
Республику,
via the
через Запорожье.
People's Republic of
И
Donetsk and
этот
Zaporozhye.
коридор пока
And this
находится в
corridor
безопасной зоне. Для того,
is
чтобы
safe at this point of
Украина могла
time.
перерезать
In order for
все
Ukraine
наши
to
пути
cut
снабжения на
off
Южном
all our
фронте,
supply routes
ей
in
надо
the
как
southern
минимум
front,
взять под
it
свой
needs at
контроль
least to
трасс Мариуполь
control
и
with fire
Melitopol.
the Mariupol
Она
Melitopol
за последние 40 с
trunk
лишним
road.
дней своего
Over the
контрнаступления к
past
этой
40 days
цели
of the
даже не
counter-offensive,
приблизилась. То
Ukraine is
есть мы
not even
видим, что
close to
сухопутный
reaching
коридор работает,
that
работает
outcome,
и
and
для
the
военных,
land
и
corridor
для
works fine
гражданского
for the
снабжения как
military and
Херсонской
for
области, так и Крыма, потому
civilian
что
supplies of the
грузовой
Kherson
транспорт
region and
не
Crimea,
ходил по
because the
Крымскому мосту, он шел
lorries
либо по
didn't go
паромным
by the
переправам, либо по
Crimean Bridge. They
сухопутному
used the
коридору
ferries
и
or
будет
the
продолжать
land
идти.
corridor,
Безусловно,
and the trucks will
это
keep using
скажется
that, and definitely
сегодня в
that will
основном на
tell
мирных жителях, потому что, конечно,
most mostly on the civilians, because there will be a lot of road jams and congested roads, and now with the high season ongoing, well, the tourists will find it difficult to reach that, and the Crimea has always been our favored resort and granary for the Soviet people, and now in the changed economic context, many Russians can't afford to go abroad to have their vacations, and I'm one of these people. I've been relaxing in the Crimea over the past several years. It is a wonderful achievement and a good find for us. And you know, the peaceful civilians will suffer most. They will face up to the jams and difficulties getting there. So from the perspective of strategy and warfare, definitely we should make conclusions. Definitely it is a reputation blow, but we should not be desperate and say that we have lost it all and the adversary now has an advantage. They do not have an advantage. The only point to mention is that I would like to have a more outspoken and straightforward response from Russia on that terrorist attack. And for us it's a terrorist attack, and for Ukraine it is a successful act of sabotage. But actually we should retaliate, hit back, because the footage with the destroyed Crimean Bridge has gone viral worldwide, and all the major news outlets have shown that, and it has been interpreted as a major success of the Ukrainian special services. At the same time, well, with respect to the retaliation strike, as the Defense Ministry calls it, we only saw a press release, and we saw the launch of missiles footage, and actually what the targets impacted have been is not clear. And for me as a journalist, this press release only adds up ambiguity and additional questions, because the press release spells out that strikes were carried out on a shipyard where those military underwater drones were produced, and also a depot, oil depot, or fuel depot. And why we have been impacting the shipyard and depot, only responding to Ukrainian terrorist attacks, is a question, because we should do that on a daily routine basis, destroying the military infrastructure of the enemy, and we do not need any pretexts for that. And Ukraine has shown that no red lines or breaks or stop signals are existent for them. They have been trying to do damage to our infrastructure on a daily basis, irrespective of what we have been doing. So we, in this context of the withdrawal from the grain deal, we should work for our future, not waiting for any moves by Ukraine in order to respond afterwards. We should embark on a systemic basis, work, and destroying the fuel depot and shipyards and docks and plants and the launch facilities must be destroyed. It should not be a retaliatory measure. It should be a systemic, routine measure, irrespective of what Ukraine has been doing. This is my personal view as a side observer who has been reading the press releases by the Defense Ministry and starts asking questions. And these questions definitely are frequently asked in Russian society, but our military apparatus, our machine is, very clumsy. We're used to that, and it doesn't always do what the society expects it to do, and probably it should not, as it is actually a sensitive agency with their own standards. But if we speak about the information component of the conflict, unfortunately, here we actually trail our adversaries. With respect to the port infrastructure strikes, well, these strikes, they are wanted, they're asking for them, and since the start of the conflict, We have been prone to demonstrate chevalier attitudes and behavior. We have been riding the white horse and wearing white gloves, trying not to stain ourselves, but the adversary has shown that all the means will do for them. So I think that when we have seen the withdrawal from the grain deal, Ukraine will keep trying to use the sea navigation to export their grain and import arms by sea, given that the Russian Navy will not control and frisk and search the content of the ships anymore. Ukraine, I think, did everything possible so that we should withdraw, so that they are not under the eye of the Russian Navy and they can carry anything by sea, anything they want. It's not accidental that Zelensky has turned the Turkish president and the United Nations so that they should continue exporting products and produce from the Ukrainian ports without Russian participation, and different options are on the table. I assume that Turkey may dole out military convoys to accompany Ukrainian vessels that will use the routes of the territorial waters of NATO countries like Bulgaria, and this will put us, Russia, in an awkward position. The only way to avoid that and to avoid arms supplies by seas, to destroy the port infrastructure of Ukraine, be it Odessa, Nikolaev, or any other sea port at the Black Sea coast. This is now a matter of life and death, of survival. And this is, something that Ukraine has been doing. We should sever this logistical chain, otherwise more bloodshed will be observed and the Ukrainian military machine will become more powerful. But this is the only thing that we should do. We should also respond in a more powerful way with respect to the bridges on Dniester River connecting the western Ukraine and central Ukraine. These are the bridges in the western Ukraine also that are used to supply flows of armaments from the Ukrainian backers. And we have not been doing that. I don't know the reason, but Ukraine has been showing and proving that they actually want to sever our supply lines, but unfortunately we do not retaliate. We don't never impact the bridges that are used for the Western supplies. We tried to bring down a bridge in Odessa and used missiles and sea drones. There was an attempt, but actually all of that were one-off things that yielded no tangible outcomes, and the tangible outcomes can be achieved and attained by systemic, routine work, planned work to destroy facilities. Well, some believe that bridges in Ukraine cannot be destroyed because we will use them for our offensive, but I don't see it's a foreseeable future, and I think when time is right for us to launch our offensive, Kyiv will blow them up on their own, and we will have to build any temporary bridge facilities. Just remember the Antonovsky Bridge, 142 impacts by HIMARS and hurricane and other Olhan shells, 142 impacts. Still, the bridge withstood that, and our troops were able to pass to and fro. But indeed, destroying this logistics hub was their priority until we were present on the right bank, and now we have been using the ferry, which makes the supplies to the other shore more difficult. But the retaliatory response per se could have been more substantial and tangible, including info-wise.
Well, let's talk about the information and some of the things that you've raised. You know, when we discuss the Crimea Bridge, you've acknowledged that it was used to transport military equipment across the bridge, and yet Russia has called the Ukrainian attack a terrorist attack. And look, my heart goes out to the parents of the 14-year-old girl, Alexandra, who died in this attack. They were innocent civilians, and they shouldn't have died. But if we're going to be honest, the bridge is a critical line of communication. And from a military perspective, severing that line of communication is to the advantage of Ukraine. That is a military necessity. As is cutting off the land bridge. As you said, the Ukrainian objective in their counteroffensive was to bring under fire the highway going through Mariupol, Melitopol, connecting Donetsk with Crimea. That is a military objective. It's not a terrorist act. Could, and the problem with Russia using this kind of information war, calling it a terrorist act, is it ties their hands, as you said, when it comes to dropping the bridges over the Dnieper River. I think there's many people who look at the concentration of Ukrainian forces to the east of the Dnieper River and say the best way to destroy these forces would be to cut them off from their logistics west of the river by dropping the bridges. But Russia isn't dropping the bridges. There's many people who look at the attack on Odessa and say that you're not solving the problem, you're just addressing the symptoms, that to cure the disease of Odessa, Russia will have to militarily occupy Odessa, or else it will forever be used as a base from which to attack Crimea. Last night, 32 drones were launched from the vicinity of Odessa against Crimea. So is Russia its own worst enemy in this case? Because it seems that Russia has approached this conflict. They call it a special military operation. They say that it's not an invasion, it's not a full-scale war. But maybe it's time for Russia to start viewing it as a full-scale war, not in terms of mobilization of the Russian nation, but just how its military is used. Is it time for Russia to drop the bridges over the Dnieper? Is it time for Russia to occupy Odessa? And does Russia have the military capability to do this?
Well, this is the question that I have been asking for months in my reports and on my Telegram channel, and there are no logical answers. With respect to the wording, to the language, you have responded yourself that Russia legally is not in a war, is not waging a war, and Ukraine did not declare war on us either. On both sides, these are half-baked measures, and in Ukraine and in Russia, legally, it is not considered to be a classical military conflict or a war. So, within those legal frameworks that the Russian authorities have, they call the attack against the Crimean Bridge a terrorist attack, because people, civilians, lost their lives, and it's not martial law in force in the Krasnodarsk region, so it's peaceful times, and they lost their lives, so it is a terrorist attack. We proceed from the reality, legal reality that we have, and actually the first attack against the Crimea was a classical terrorist attack with a civilian vehicle, a truck full unloaded with explosives. As regards the scale of the hostilities on the Ukrainian territory, I've always had questions about how the resources are used by our military. Actually, let me exaggerate and say one caliber is used to impact one barrack, and 100 people will lose their lives. 10 caliber missiles will end with 1,000 troops, and that will take the Ukrainian authorities 2 days to mobilize people from bars in Odessa. mop them up from Odessa bars. It will take 2 days. And 10 costly missiles are wasted. Actually, I think it would be wiser to send those caliber missiles into one and the same point of a Dniester bridge or other bridge in Zotok, where arms from Romania are supplied, and 10 caliber missiles would be enough to impact powerfully and down the bridge and drop the bridge, and that would give better effect, because the 1,000 troops newly mobilized will need vehicles and tanks and rifles that are supplied across the bridges. So, to my mind, it would be more effective to strike the supply chains than barracks. But the military of ours have their own designs. I don't know all the picture. I have only some of the parts of that general picture in front of me. Well, with respect to the military capability, we have that, and it has been growing. We have demonstrated and shown good results with barraging munitions. They destroyed bridges where saboteurs that were used by saboteurs to cross the Russian border, and we have other types of munitions that are now tested. But actually, if we speak about the advances, it is about missiles. We see that missiles have been used systematically, and a train in Kramatorsk was destroyed carrying Western military equipment with Leopard tanks, and part of those tanks is lost irreversibly, other part can be repaired. But we destroyed that train when it reached the area of hostilities, but it could have not reached that area. And we spent an Iskander missile against this bridge instead of impacting a bridge with that Iskander that was used by the train to arrive. I don't know how to call that. Our president said once that we haven't even started. Well, I don't know what else we might have and what else we will start using when we launch the real thing and do it in an adult way, as they say. Now they are trying to emaciate the enemy. They are letting the equipment arrive at the zone of hostilities and destroy it. If you look at the 40-something days of the Ukrainian counter-offensive, the outcomes, the achievements are meager, very small, very low, and the casualties of theirs are disastrous. It does not mean that we have fully weakened Ukrainian military capability. No, they still have enough Western military equipment, and they will have more supplies that they haven't seen yet. In near future, I think they will approve the long-range missiles that reach farther than HIMARS, and so on and so forth. The fewer achievements Ukraine has, like if they say that if Ukraine fails to show good outcomes, they will see no more supplies. I don't think so. The worse the results of Ukraine are, the more formidable equipment will be supplied, so that Ukraine is capable of countering Russia, and so that Russia should not be able to launch its own counter-offensive. But now, as for us, we are trying to wear the enemy down, but at the same time, we wear ourselves down as well, because the defensive operation also means some casualties, and we sustain casualties. They are not as huge as the Ukrainian ones, but still, we have been facing casualties, but actually I really would like us to have fresh troops and fresh forces that can launch the counteroffensive of ours when Ukraine is worn down completely. And from the military perspective, that would be natural with respect to the danger emanating from Odessa and other Black Sea cities of theirs. It's obvious. Well, probably at the outset, one should not have tried to reach Kiev, but they should have used all the troops available of the forces to cut off South Bessarabia, so that the Black Sea region should have belonged to us. In that event, we wouldn't have had any problem with the Snake Island and the loss of the flagship of the Black Sea Navy of ours, the Moscow cruiser. If we had cut the main force, if we had sent the main forces of ours to cut off the threat from the Black Sea, we would have been better off today, because, we would reach Kherson quickly, and we did reach it quickly. And today, seizing Odessa, retaking Odessa, is a very distant, vague prospect, because in order to retake Odessa, we should reclaim Nikolaev, and to reclaim Nikolaev, we should for a start reclaim Kherson, and to reclaim Kherson, we should cross the Dnieper once again, and we should recall the experience of the World War II, as the Nazis were our opponents, and we first had to seize Kiev and then go down to Dnepropetrovsk, and only afterwards our renowned commander Margelov seized Kherson. There was a loop, and but for that now the front should collapse, and the motivation, the morale of the adversary should be at the floor level, so that they should go back to their western borders, fall back to the western borders. Now in Kupiansk, where we are on the offensive, they fiercely resist. They don't raise their hands and start boating away. They actually resist. They fight for every patch of land, for every floor. Back in 2014, when the Donbass conflict was in its inception stage, and when the first battles over the Donetsk airport began, I asked one of the commanders, why can't you defeat them? Why does it take you so long to seize the Donetsk airport? And he said, because we're waging a war against ourselves. They are the same Russians with the same moral values, not a step back, but they call themselves Ukrainians, but they're as stubborn as we are, as persistent as we are, because it is actually a very hard war. We are equally brazen, equally brave, equally unhinged in the good sense of the word, and that side is definitely actually backed by the collective West, which adds some fuel to the flames and is an adjustment, and as the military operation goes, it has an impact. So the main thing that lies on the table is now that we should preclude that the adversary should go through the defense line of ours in the Kherson region and force it through. And the second item on the agenda is the full liberation of Donbass. This is why we are seeing the ramping up of hostilities in Svatovsk of Lugansk, People's Republic of Lugansk, and in the Kupiansk, where the Ukrainian command has acknowledged that we have some achievements on the Russian side.
Listening to you, I detect a sense of frustration. You're somebody who understands conflict. You understand Russia. You understand Ukraine and the realities of the situation. And there's frustration in your voice, and it reminds me in many ways of the frustration that existed in the voice of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Just last month we had a a situation that many in the West are still trying to wrap their heads around. We don't understand what happened. The legendary Wagner private military company, which had achieved such impressive victories in Soledar and Bakhmut, suddenly revolted, apparently. 8,000 Wagner fighters moving into Rostov and then heading towards Moscow. Prigozhin speaking out bitterly towards a defense